Beneath your feet on a crowded beach, an entire medieval city could be sleeping. We are decoding the geological clues that reveal ancient cities lost to changing coastlines. By the end, you will see the map of the past completely redrawn. How does a bustling port simply vanish beneath the waves? And what stories do its sunken stones tell about human ambition? What forgotten world would you most want to see rise from the sea? A coastline is never truly still. It breathes with the tides, shifts with the seasons, and transforms over centuries in a slow dance between land and sea. This constant change is the very reason our history can be swallowed by the waves. To find a lost city, we must first understand the restless earth it was built upon. The primary force at work is sea level change, a global phenomenon driven by the melting of vast ice sheets and the thermal expansion of ocean water. But the land itself is also moving. In regions once crushed by the immense weight of glaciers, the ground is still rebounding, rising slowly like bread dough after a heavy weight is lifted. Meanwhile, in other areas, the land is sinking, a process known as subsidence. This is especially true for river deltas, where ancient cities often flourished. The very sediment that made the land fertile for farming also compacts under the weight of civilization over generations, causing the ground to gradually lower. Add to this the daily grind of erosion, where waves and currents tirelessly pull sand and soil out to sea, and the stage is set for a dramatic disappearance. A prosperous port could find itself, over hundreds of years, slowly sinking while the waters around it steadily rose. The change was too gradual for any single person to witness, a story written not in years but in millennia. This is the fundamental drama of our coastlines, a geological truth that holds the first clue to every sunken settlement we seek. The first tangible evidence often comes not from a dramatic discovery, but from a quiet, methodical process that reads the earth like a history book. Scientists use hollow coring devices to drill deep into the soft ground of coastal plains or even the seabed itself, pulling up long, cylindrical columns of accumulated sediment. These cores are the closest thing we have to a time machine, preserving a timeline of environmental change in their layered composition, a field known as stratigraphy. Each distinct band of material tells a clear story. A thick layer of coarse sand might be the ghost of a powerful ancient storm that battered the shoreline. A dark, organic band of peat signals a time when the area was a freshwater marsh, stable and dry. The real revelation comes when the core sample suddenly changes, revealing a layer packed with crushed seashells, fragments of pottery, or even the microscopic remnants of ancient hearths and building materials. This is the undeniable signature of a human community. By using scientific dating methods on organic material within these layers, researchers can pinpoint exactly when people lived there and, crucially, when the sea finally reclaimed the land. The lost city of Dunwich off the English coast provides a perfect example. Core samples taken from beneath the waves clearly showed the layered foundations of streets and buildings, physically confirming the historical tales of a great port gradually consumed by the sea. These silent columns of mud and silt hold the first chapter of the story, a record of daily life written in the very ground the city was built upon. But what happens when this geological evidence points the way to something more solid, something we can actually hold in our hands? That waterlogged, spongy layer of peat is far more than just swampy ground. It is a perfect environmental time capsule, preserving an incredibly detailed record of a world that has long since vanished. This humble, organic substance holds the second major geological clue to finding our lost cities. Peat forms in still, freshwater environments like marshes and bogs, areas that often served as the fertile hinterlands just behind bustling coastal ports. When scientists drill a core sample and find a thick band of peat now buried beneath layers of sand and marine silt, the story becomes clear. This signals a dramatic and permanent shift, a moment when dry, stable land was overtaken by the sea. Within that dark, fibrous peat, a miniature world is frozen in time. By analyzing the preserved pollen grains, tiny plant fossils, and even the remains of insects, researchers can reconstruct the landscape with astonishing precision. They can determine if the area was a dense forest, a managed agricultural field, or a brackish salt marsh. Each type of plant and insect tells a specific story about the climate and how people used the land. Take the lost medieval town of Ravenser Odd, a once prosperous port on the Humber estuary in England. Core samples from the area reveal a clear sequence. First, there is a layer of peat full of pollen from terrestrial plants and grasses, evidence of the dry land the town was built upon. Then, abruptly, the peat gives way to a layer packed with marine shells. This stark transition in the mud physically charts the town's demise, a direct record of the sea's victory over the settlement. These organic archives do more than just mark a disaster. They provide a nuanced understanding of the very world the inhabitants knew. They tell us what the air smelled like, what crops might have grown in the fields nearby, and what the local environment offered for survival. This rich, reconstructed setting sets the stage perfectly for the next discovery, the one that makes the past feel truly tangible, the bones of the city itself. The silent testimony of the land itself offers our third great clue. A coastline's shape is not an accident but a chronicle, a physical record of its long struggle with the sea. This field, known as coastal geomorphology, teaches us to read the landscape like a map of the past. Look at a smooth, curved bay. To us, it is simply a beautiful beach, but to a trained eye, that curve might be the ghost of a river mouth that once provided a safe harbor for ships. A cliff face that seems to plunge directly into the water might hold the secret of a hanging valley, where a small river valley now ends abruptly at a cliff edge, its mouth submerged, indicating the sea level was once significantly lower. Even a long, thin spit of sand connecting an island to the mainland, a landform called a tombolo, can mark a pathway that ancient people used, a dry route that is now vanished beneath the waves. These features are the subtle signposts pointing toward places that were once not just dry land, but desirable real estate for our ancestors. They sought sheltered inlets, fresh water from rivers, and defensible positions, all of which leave a distinct signature on the land's anatomy. Modern technology gives us a god's eye view of these ancient clues. Aerial photography and LIDAR, which uses laser pulses to see through forest canopy and map the ground surface in incredible detail, can reveal the ghostly footprints of human activity. The lost Welsh settlement of Trelech, for instance, was brought back to light when LIDAR surveys uncovered the faint but distinct outlines of medieval building platforms and field boundaries etched into the earth, patterns completely invisible from the ground. By interpreting these silent landforms, the search for a sunken city transforms. We are no longer staring at a vast, empty ocean, but focusing on a specific, promising location where the land itself whispers that people once lived here. But reading the surface is only the beginning. The final confirmation, the moment of truth, requires us to find a way to listen to what lies buried deep below. There is a profound moment in this search when you find not just what people built, but the very ground they stood on. This is the power of the fourth clue. the discovery of submerged soil horizons known as paleosols. Picture a dark, rich layer of earth, far denser than the sand above it, found deep beneath a modern beach or seabed. This is a fossilized land surface, a literal snapshot of a forgotten world. Finding a paleosol is like finding the floor of a vanished room. It is one of the most definitive geological proofs that an area was once stable, dry land, capable of supporting forests, farms, and entire communities. These ancient soils retain a chemical memory of their past. Scientists can analyze them to find the microscopic pollen of the plants that grew there or the specific isotopes that indicate a thriving terrestrial ecosystem. But the true connection to human life becomes undeniable when this geological clue meets an archaeological one. When the dark band of a paleosol is found to contain the distinct imprint of a post hole, the blackened stones of a hearth, or fragments of everyday pottery, the story locks into place. The legend of the sunken city of Rungholt, consumed by a great storm surge in the 14th century, was confirmed through just such a discovery. Investigations in the Wadden Sea identified vast expanses of these submerged soils, complete with the faint but clear remnants of drainage ditches and building foundations. These are the literal floors upon which our ancestors walked, the ground that supported their homes and their lives. It is a deeply tangible link, a direct portal to a living landscape. But how do we possibly map these hidden horizons, these lost floors that lie buried beneath tons of sand and water? The answer lies in a technology that allows us to see through the earth itself, to listen to the whispers of the deep. These technological eyes give us a way to listen to the earth. Ground-penetrating radar acts like a sophisticated echo sounder for solid ground, sending pulses of energy downward and mapping the reflections that bounce back from buried walls or voids. Magnetometry is even more subtle, sensing the faint but permanent magnetic fingerprint left in soil that has been intensely heated, as happens in a hearth, a kiln, or even a fire that burned down a wooden structure. In the search for coastal cities, these tools are adapted for a watery world. Sub-bottom profilers use sound waves to penetrate the seabed, building a cross-sectional image of the layered sediments below, much like a medical ultrasound reveals the structures within a body. It was this very approach that meticulously charted the sunken streets and foundations of Dunwich, transforming local legends into a precise, mappable reality lying beneath the North Sea. This is the power of geophysical survey. It allows researchers to cover vast areas without a single shovel of dirt being turned, identifying promising hotspots with scientific precision. Yet this detailed underground map is only one layer of the story. To truly understand the fate of a lost city, we need to see the bigger picture, a view so vast it can only be captured from the sky. From the sky, the land tells a different story. What appears as a uniform green field or a tranquil shoreline from the ground transforms, from a few hundred meters up, into a canvas of hidden history. This is the power of the bird's eye view, where the grand patterns of a lost world emerge with startling clarity. Aerial photography has long been an archaeologist's secret weapon. During dry summers, a fascinating phenomenon occurs. The soil covering ancient ditches or pits is often deeper and retains more moisture. The plants growing over buried stone foundations, however, have shallower soil and struggle for water. From above, this stress creates visible lines and patterns in the crops, a hidden blueprint of a forgotten settlement etched in living color. Today, this technique is supercharged by satellites equipped with multispectral sensors. These advanced eyes can see far beyond what is visible to us, detecting the most subtle variations in plant health and soil composition. They can pinpoint a single, stressed line of wheat that traces the course of a sunken wall, or a patch of unusually vibrant growth that hints at the rich, organic fill of an ancient storage pit. But the true revolution for coastal discovery is LIDAR. Imagine a laser scanner mounted on a plane, firing millions of light pulses toward the ground. These pulses pierce through the forest canopy and bounce back, creating an exquisitely detailed three-dimensional map of the bare earth beneath. For areas now submerged by tides, this technology is like pulling back a curtain. It digitally strips away the water itself, revealing the ghostly topography of a lost landscape. In the United Kingdom's Severn estuary, LIDAR surveys have done exactly that, uncovering vast, intricate networks of prehistoric field systems and medieval fish traps that are completely invisible at high tide. These are not just isolated ruins, they are the bones of an entire working landscape, a complex human world that thrived where now only the sea flows. This expansive perspective answers a bigger question. It shows us how a lost city was connected, where its roads led, where its food was grown, and how it interacted with its neighbors. We move from discovering a single building to understanding a living, breathing community. And with that understanding, we are drawn inevitably to the most poignant question of all. What was it like for the people who called that disappearing world home? The story of Dunwich is written in mud and memory. On the coast of Suffolk, the North Sea now covers what was once one of England's greatest ports, a place so prosperous it rivaled London itself. Today, only a handful of cottages remain on the crumbling cliffs, while beneath the waves lies a sprawling ghost city. Historical documents list its wonders: over 500 houses, a mint, a dozen churches, and a busy harbor that welcomed ships from across Europe. But the geological record tells a darker, more definitive story of its end. Sediment cores pulled from the seabed reveal a brutal sequence of events. A dark, peaty layer, the old ground where people walked, is abruptly capped by thick bands of sand. This is the signature of catastrophe. The sand dumped by colossal storm surges in the 13th and 14th centuries. These storms, one after another, battered the soft glacial cliffs upon which Dunwich was built. Each surge tore away more of the town, collapsing streets and buildings into the churning water, and each layer of sand sealed another piece of the city beneath the sea. Marine geophysical surveys have turned these layers into a map of loss. They have traced the ghostly grid of medieval streets and pinpointed the sunken foundations of lost churches like St. Peter's, their stones now silent homes for marine life. The harbor, the very source of the city's wealth, was scoured away by the relentless currents, its protective sandbars shifting to become instruments of its doom. Dunwich stands as a profound lesson in environmental vulnerability. Its fate was sealed not by a single disaster, but by a perfect storm of geology and climate, a high water table, erodible cliffs, and a rising sea that turned its greatest asset, the ocean, into its destroyer. It forces us to ask how many other vibrant ports, now just legends, shared this same silent fate beneath the shifting coastline. But the story of a lost coast is not always written by nature alone. In the sprawling Scheldt estuary of the Netherlands, a different kind of tragedy unfolded, one where human hands played a decisive role in the sea's victory. This is the story of Saeftinghe, a once fertile and heavily populated region now known only as the Verdronken Land, the Drowned Land. In the late 16th century, this was a prosperous area of thriving villages and productive farmland, protected from the sea by a robust system of dikes. Yet today it is a vast tidal marsh, a haunting landscape of mud and silence. The geological evidence tells a dramatic tale of sudden transformation. Beneath the thick, waterlogged layers of clay and silt that now cover the region, core samples reveal a telltale band of dark peat. This is the preserved floor of the old world, holding the pollen of crops and the roots of the forests that once grew there. The shift from this stable, organic layer to the heavy marine clays above it is stark and immediate, marking not a slow erosion but a single, catastrophic influx of the sea. The cause was not just a storm, but a deliberate act during a time of conflict. Historical records indicate that defensive dikes were intentionally breached to flood the land, a tactical decision that unleashed the sea and permanently reclaimed the territory. This single act of war rewritten the map, submerging villages and farmland under a new, shallow ocean. Even now, at the lowest tides, the skeletal remains of that lost world push through the mud. The blackened stumps of a drowned forest stand like sentinels, and the occasional brick or piece of pottery surfaces, a fleeting glimpse of the communities that vanished beneath the clay. Saeftinghe stands as a powerful reminder that our coastlines are shaped by both environmental forces and human choices, a testament to how quickly a managed landscape can be returned to the wild. The Legend of Rungholt begins with a whisper of divine judgment, a story told for generations of a wealthy and arrogant town punished for its sins by a vengeful sea. This fabled Atlantis of the North Sea was said to have vanished in a single night during the Great Storm Tide of 1362, an event so catastrophic it was called the Groot Mandrank, the Great Drowning of People. For centuries, it remained just that, a powerful cautionary tale, its true location and very existence lost to myth. Yet the mud and sand of the Wadden Sea held a secret, a truth far more compelling than any legend. The search for Rungholt began not with treasure maps but with the subtle language of the land itself. Scientists probing the vast intertidal zone, that area between high and low tide, made a series of startling discoveries. Using advanced sensing equipment, they began to trace the ghostly outlines of a sophisticated community directly within the seabed. They found the long, straight lines of meticulously dug drainage ditches, the raised circular platforms known as turpen that served as dwelling mounds to keep homes safe from high water, and the compacted foundations of what were once sturdy buildings. This was not a random scattering of ruins. It was the organized footprint of a thriving medieval town, perfectly preserved in the waterlogged sediment that had encased it for hundreds of years. The most definitive geological evidence came from core samples, which revealed a stark, two-part story. First, a dark, fibrous layer of peat was found, and within it, the preserved pollen of cultivated crops and the root systems of managed plants. This was the soil of a working landscape, the very ground farmers tilled. Then, abruptly, this life-giving layer was sealed under a thick, heavy blanket of marine sand. This sudden transition is the unmistakable signature of the Groot Mandrank, a geological timestamp that corroborates the historical record with chilling precision. The storm did not just flood the town, it entombed it, pressing a thriving human settlement deep into the earth and covering it with the sea's own debris. The story of Rungholt is therefore a profound fusion of myth and material science. It shows us that even our most dramatic legends are often rooted in a real and tangible past. This discovery moves us beyond a simple tale of punishment, inviting a deeper question. If a community as advanced as Rungholt could be so utterly erased, how did other cultures not just survive, but truly master their relationship with the ever-changing coast? Their world was a constant, whispered conversation with the tide. For the medieval coastal dweller, the sea was not a distant spectacle but a powerful neighbor, a source of bounty and a looming threat that shaped every aspect of daily existence. This was a life of profound negotiation, a continuous effort to build a stable world on the very edge of instability. These communities were far from passive victims of their environment. They observed, they learned, and they engineered remarkable solutions. In the low-lying regions of the Netherlands and northern Germany, they did not simply build on the ground. They built the ground itself, piling earth and manure into massive, artificial hills known as Turpen and Weerden. These were not just piles of dirt. They were carefully constructed islands of safety, lifting entire villages, their homes, their churches, and their livestock above the reach of all but the most catastrophic storm surges. This was a communal act of defiance, a declaration that they would not be moved. Their ambition grew with their understanding. They began to connect these mounds with low embankments, the first simple dikes, creating protected pockets of land. Over generations, these evolved into complex systems of seawalls, sluice gates, and drainage channels, a networked landscape designed to reclaim fertile land from the marshes and hold the sea at bay. The placement of their settlements reveals a deep, accumulated wisdom. They sought out natural ridges, the highest points on coastal spits, or the slightly elevated ground where two rivers met. Yet the archaeological record tells a sobering story. Even these strategic locations were often not enough. We find layers of occupation separated by thick bands of sterile sand, evidence of homes abandoned after a great flood, only to be rebuilt years or decades later once the memory of the disaster had faded. This cycle of destruction, resilience, and return speaks to a powerful, deep-seated connection to the coast. It was a calculated risk, a recognition that the rewards of living by the sea, its trade routes and rich fisheries were worth the ever-present danger. This ancient dialogue between human ingenuity and the power of the ocean holds a stark mirror to our own time. Their story of adaptation, of raising their homes and building walls, is one we are beginning to relive on a global scale. It forces us to ask what made these risky, dynamic places so valuable. What powerful economic engines were these communities protecting, and what treasures were they trading across the restless waters that would one day claim them? A harbor was more than just a place to dock a ship. It was the beating economic heart of a medieval city, the primary reason settlements clung so tenaciously to the shifting coastline. In an age without paved roads for heavy transport, water was the only true superhighway, and a deep, sheltered harbor was a gateway to unimaginable wealth and global connection. These ports hummed with activity, their quaysides stacked with bales of English wool, barrels of French wine, rolls of Flemish cloth, and precious sacks of spices from the east. This constant flow of goods made cities like Dunwich or the legendary Rungholt into international hubs, their prosperity built directly upon the wooden decks of the ships that came and went. Yet this very advantage was a dangerous bargain. To maintain that vital access to the sea, cities had to settle in geologically dynamic zones, right at the mouths of rivers or within sprawling estuaries. These locations were inherently unstable, caught in a constant tug of war between land and sea. The same rivers that provided a calm, navigable channel for trade also carried a relentless load of sediment, which could gradually silt up a harbor, choking the city's lifeline. The geological record often tells a story of a slow decline before a final, dramatic end. Core samples from vanished ports frequently show a sequence where layers rich with the debris of busy human activity, like pottery and food waste, are slowly replaced by sterile layers of sand and silt. This is the story of a harbor gradually filling in, becoming too shallow for the deep draft trading vessels that were its lifeblood. The city's economy would wither, its population might dwindle, leaving it far more vulnerable when the catastrophic storm surge finally arrived. That final disaster, preserved as a thick, sudden layer of marine sand in the sediment core, was often just the coup de grace. The silent, sunken remains of these ports are now archaeological treasure troves. The ghostly outlines of wharves and jetties, and even the wooden skeletons of abandoned ships found buried in the mud, provide a crystal-clear window into medieval maritime economies. They tell us what was being traded, how ships were built, and the scale of these forgotten commercial networks. By understanding this powerful economic logic, we can start to think like a medieval merchant. We can look at a modern coastline and identify the exact spots that would have been irresistible for trade, the sheltered inlets and river mouths that promised wealth but also held geological peril. This knowledge turns a vast, empty shoreline into a focused search grid, pointing us directly toward the most likely places a city might have risen, thrived, and ultimately been reclaimed by the sea. And when we find those sunken wharves, what else might be waiting there, resting in the mud beside them? A diver's glove drifts through the murky water, its gentle sweep clearing a patch of silt to reveal the curve of a leather shoe, still holding the shape of a foot that walked these streets 700 years ago. This is the moment where history stops being an abstract idea and becomes a physical, tangible truth. The marine environment, so often a force of destruction, can also be a perfect preservative. In the cold, dark, and oxygen-deprived mud of a submerged site, the normal processes of decay simply stop. Wood does not rot, leather does not crumble, and textiles do not disintegrate. They wait, suspended in time, for a hand to uncover them again. A wooden comb found in such conditions might still have a strand of hair caught in its teeth. A pewter jug could sit upright, as if its owner had just set it down. These are not treasures of gold and silver, but something far more precious, the intimate debris of everyday existence. They tell us what people wore on their feet, how they cared for their appearance, and what they drank from at their own tables. The waterlogged sites along London's historic River Thames, while not fully sunken, offer a stunning preview of this phenomenon, yielding an astonishing array of leather goods, intricate textiles, and even preserved food waste that paints a vibrant picture of medieval London life. Each object is a silent story. A finely crafted bronze brooch speaks of wealth and fashion, while a simple, heavily worn tool tells a story of manual labor. The presence of a gaming piece carved from bone whispers of leisure hours and laughter in a home that no longer exists. These artifacts connect us directly to the individuals, making their vanished world feel immediate and heartbreakingly real. They raise a compelling question about the scale of what remains, hinting at the vast architectural footprints that must surround these personal treasures. These faint, rectangular outlines are the city's skeleton. When marine surveys reveal the ghostly plan of a house or the precise alignment of a church foundation on the seabed, we are not just looking at ruins. We are reading the blueprint of a community. The relentless forces of waves and currents often leave only the lowest courses of stone, the architectural fragments that were too heavy or too buried to be swept away. Yet these fragments speak volumes. The layout of these remains is our primary text. A dense, haphazard cluster of small foundations suggests a thriving, perhaps crowded, artisan quarter. A wide, clearly defined space at the heart of the settlement, facing a large public building, points toward a marketplace or a central square for gathering. This is urban planning rendered in stone, a direct reflection of how people organized their lives together. The materials themselves tell a story of economics and connection. Finding a foundation made of locally quarried, rough fieldstone paints one picture. Discovering walls built from finely dressed, imported limestone or marble tells another, a clear signal of wealth and far-reaching trade networks that brought luxury in solid form. In Dunwich, the marine surveys did more than just find churches. They revealed their specific placements, their sizes, and their relationships to each other and to the vanished shoreline. By matching these submerged blueprints to historical tax records and chronicles, historians could identify which foundation belonged to the wealthy priory of St. John versus the smaller, more local St. Peter's Church. This allows us to map the city's spiritual and social hierarchy onto its physical streets. The orientation of a main thoroughfare leading directly from a grand church to a protected harbor does not just show a route for processions. It reveals a worldview, a physical connection between divine favor and commercial success. Interpreting these architectural ghosts is an act of resurrection. We move from seeing piles of stone to understanding a living, breathing social organism, a place of faith, commerce, and daily life. And this detailed reconstruction makes the silence that followed all the more profound, forcing us to confront the very human moments when this intricate world was lost. That dark, peaty soil, the preserved floor of a living community, does not always fade gently into marine clay. Sometimes the transition is a brutal, unmistakable line. A thick, chaotic band of coarse sand and shattered seashells, ripped from the seabed and dumped without warning over the land. This is an event layer, the geological fingerprint of a catastrophe. It marks the precise moment when the ocean's patience ran out. Scientists read these layers like the pages of a disaster report. The size of the sand grains tells them about the sheer force of the water, larger, heavier particles requiring immense energy to be carried inland. The composition of the debris, mixed with deep water shells and coastal sand, reveals how far the surge reached to gather its destructive payload. By tracing the extent and thickness of this layer across multiple core samples, they can even map the storm's path, understanding which parts of a city bore the brunt of the wave's fury. Imagine a core sample from a lost settlement's main street. For generations, the sediment is dark and rich with the charcoal from hearths and the fragments of daily life. Then, in a single, stark boundary, that record is severed by a 5-centimeter layer of pure, sterile, coarse sand. Above it, the sediment might be different, perhaps a fine silt settling in a newly quiet lagoon, proof that the landscape itself was permanently altered. This granular evidence moves the story from a slow, creeping decline to a punctuated, violent end. It explains why some cities like Rungholt were abandoned so completely and never rebuilt. The trauma was too great, the damage too absolute. It forces us to wonder what that final night was like. Were there any warnings, a sudden drop in pressure, an unnatural retreat of the water, or did the storm simply arrive in the dark with a roar that erased all other sound? The ground was shifting beneath their feet long before the storms arrived. To understand the final, dramatic collapse of these coastal cities, we must look beyond the shoreline to a planetary scale shift in the climate itself. The medieval world experienced two distinct climatic chapters, and the transition between them sealed the fate of countless communities. The first was the medieval warm period, a time of unusually mild and stable temperatures that lasted from roughly 950 to 1250 AD. During these centuries, harvests were reliable, growing seasons were longer, and this agricultural prosperity fueled a population boom across Europe. This abundance created a powerful push, encouraging settlers to move into new territories, including the fertile but vulnerable coastal plains and marshes. They built their ports and farms with confidence on land that seemed stable and generous. Then the climate turned. A gradual cooling began, ushering in what we now call the Little Ice Age, a 500-year period of advancing glaciers, unpredictable seasons, and intensifying storms that started around 1300 AD. This was the threat multiplier. Colder temperatures meant more powerful winter storms brewing over the Atlantic. Rising sea levels, coupled with these fiercer gales, produced storm surges of a height and destructive power that the older coastal defenses simply could not withstand. We know this not from written records alone, but from the planet's own archives. Ice cores drilled from ancient glaciers preserved tiny bubbles of the atmosphere from centuries past, revealing a steady drop in global temperatures. The width of tree rings tells a story of summer warmth giving way to shorter, cooler growing seasons, and marine sediment cores show a sudden increase in coarse sand layers during this period, the geological echo of those violent, frequent storms scouring the seafloor. The prosperous ports built during a warm, forgiving climate now found themselves on the front lines of a new, hostile world. Their fate was not just bad luck, but a collision between human expansion and a changing planet. This deep climatic context makes the story of a place like Dunwich or Rungholt feel both tragically specific and universally resonant. It raises a pressing question for our own time. How do we precisely measure the timing of such a slow-motion disaster and separate the gradual slide from the final, catastrophic blow? A splinter of wood from a sunken wharf holds a secret, a ticking clock that stopped the moment the waves closed over it. To move from a compelling legend to a dated historical event, we need to turn these silent artifacts into precise calendars. The most famous of these scientific timekeepers is radiocarbon dating. Every living thing absorbs a tiny, constant amount of a radioactive form of carbon from the atmosphere. When that life ends, the clock starts as this carbon begins to decay at a steady, measurable rate. By analyzing a preserved seed, a piece of wood from a building, or even a fragment of bone from a settlement's final days, scientists can determine how long ago that organism died, providing a powerful timestamp for the layer of sediment that entombs it. But what about the sand and silt itself, the very material that buried the city? For that, researchers use a different technique called optically stimulated luminescence, or OSL. It works on a simple, beautiful principle. Tiny grains of minerals like quartz and feldspar naturally absorb energy from background radiation in the soil. They only release this energy in the form of a tiny flash of light when they are exposed to sunlight. So, when a storm surge buries a street under a thick layer of sand, those mineral grains are plunged into darkness and begin storing energy again. By measuring how much energy they have accumulated since that last exposure to the sun, scientists can calculate the exact moment they were buried, effectively dating the catastrophic event that sealed the city's fate. Then there is the remarkable precision of tree ring dating, or dendrochronology. If a wooden structure, like a support beam from a house or a plank from a ship, is recovered and it has a long sequence of rings, it can be matched against a master chronology for that region. This is like finding a unique barcode in the wood. Not only can it tell us the exact calendar year the tree was cut down, but the pattern of wide and narrow rings can even reveal the specific climatic conditions, such as droughts or plentiful rains, that the community experienced in its final years. By weaving together these different dating methods, a robust and precise timeline emerges. We are no longer dealing with a vague story about a great flood sometime in the 14th century. We can now say that the harbor was actively maintained until approximately 1280, based on the wood from its last repair, and that a catastrophic storm surge, dated by OSL to the winter of 1362, abruptly buried the town center under 2 meters of sand. This chronological backbone transforms a mystery into history. It allows us to confidently link the geological evidence of a submerged paleosol with the historical record of the Grote Mandrenk storm, or to compare the abandonment of Dunwich with the drowning of Saeftinghe, seeing them not as isolated tragedies but as part of a broader pattern of coastal change. With a precise moment of loss now pinned to the calendar, a deeper question arises: what can the fate of these individual cities tell us about the vulnerability of our own world's coastlines today? The same ocean that erased European ports holds other worlds in its depths. Far from the North Sea, the Gulf of Cambay off India's west coast presents a mystery that pushes the timeline of coastal civilization back thousands of years. Sonar surveys have mapped what appear to be vast geometric structures on the seabed, patterns of right angles and long lines that seem anything but natural. Some researchers suggest these could be the remnants of a settlement from the Harappan era, a contemporary of ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, potentially rewriting our understanding of early urban development in South Asia. The debate around these findings is fierce, with critics pointing to the possibility of natural geological formations. Yet the very possibility ignites the imagination, suggesting that our map of the ancient world is missing entire chapters now submerged by post-glacial sea level rise. The geological challenge here is immense, with the site buried under centuries of sediment washed from the Indian subcontinent, a blanket of mud that both preserves and obscures the truth. This is not a story from the Middle Ages, but from the dawn of urban life itself, a reminder that the coast has been a stage for human ambition for millennia. Meanwhile, in the Mediterranean, the water has preserved a lost world with breathtaking clarity. The ancient Egyptian cities of Thonis, Heracleion, and Canopus were legendary ports of entry for Greek traders, mentioned by historians like Herodotus, until they vanished beneath the waters of Abukir Bay. Their discovery was a triumph of underwater archaeology. Colossal statues of pharaohs and gods stand silent on the seafloor, their features still sharp, toppled as if by a giant's hand. Temples, hieroglyphic stelae, and the elegant hulls of 60 ancient ships lie half-buried in the clay. Their preservation is a gift from the Nile itself. The cities did not simply sink. They were entombed in a protective matrix of clay and silt, a direct result of the river's constant deposition of sediment in its delta. This unique geological process created a time capsule, preventing oxygen from decaying the organic materials and freezing a moment of cultural fusion between Egypt and Greece in stunning detail. The story shifts again across the Atlantic, along the coast of Florida and in the submerged caves of the Yucatan Peninsula lies evidence of a different kind of loss. These are not grand stone cities, but the resting places of early hunter-gatherers. As the great ice sheets melted at the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose hundreds of feet, swallowing vast stretches of coastal plains that once connected continents. The Bering Land Bridge, a migratory pathway for the first peoples to enter the Americas, now lies beneath the Bering Strait. In the Yucatan, a unique karst topography of porous limestone meant that as the sea rose, it flooded extensive cave systems that were once dry and accessible. Within these now submerged caverns, researchers have found the remains of hearths, tools, and ceremonial sites, indicating that these were not just temporary camps, but places of deep significance, lost to the encroaching ocean. This global tapestry shows us that the dialogue between humanity and the coast is a universal and ancient one. From the Harappan potential of Cambay to the sunken glory of Egyptian ports and the lost pathways of the first Americans, every continent has a coastline, and every coastline holds a story of a world that was. But who truly owns these stories, and what responsibilities do we have when we pull them back into the light? Raising a city from the sea is an act of both discovery and profound responsibility. The moment an artifact is lifted from its dark, protective mud, a race against time begins. After centuries in a stable, oxygen-free environment, materials like wood, leather, and textiles are suddenly exposed to the air, and the chemical changes can be swift and devastating. A perfectly preserved wooden carving can warp and crack within days, and a delicate leather shoe might crumble to dust before our eyes. This is the heartbreaking paradox of post-excavation deterioration, where the very act of recovery can trigger the object's final destruction. This fragility is compounded by modern threats that are far more aggressive than natural decay. The deep rumble of dredging operations can scrape away entire archaeological layers in hours, leveling the subtle contours of a sunken settlement to clear shipping lanes. The heavy dragnets of bottom-trawling fisheries act like underwater bulldozers, scouring the seabed and smashing any structures in their path. Offshore wind farms and cable laying, while symbols of progress, require extensive seabed intervention, potentially disturbing unexplored sites. And perhaps most cynically, looters armed with modern technology can strip a site of its most valuable artifacts, tearing them from their context and forever erasing the stories they were meant to tell. In response to these global challenges, the 2001 UNESCO Convention on the Protection of the Underwater Cultural Heritage established a vital international framework. Its core principle is that in situ preservation, leaving the site undisturbed on the seabed, should be considered the first and preferred option. This forces a difficult ethical question upon every archaeologist who finds a lost city. Do we excavate now, knowing we may only have the technology to save some artifacts while inadvertently destroying others, simply to satisfy our burning curiosity and share these wonders with the world today? Or do we have the patience to leave them in place, a gift to future generations who may possess conservation techniques we cannot yet imagine, trusting that the site will remain safe from human and natural threats? This is not an abstract debate. It is a tightrope walk between our duty to knowledge and our duty to preservation. Every decision to touch a sunken site is weighed against the risk of losing it a second time, a loss that would be entirely our fault. It forces us to look at the vast, unmapped ocean floor and wonder not only what is left to find, but what we are truly prepared to protect. Folklore keeps a different kind of map, one charted not by coordinates but by memory and story. Along the coast of Wales, the legend of Waterlogged, the Sunken Hundred, tells of a fertile kingdom protected by a great dike, lost to the sea when a well-keeper neglected his duty. In Brittany, the story of the City of Wise speaks of a princess and a magical key, a tale that ends with the waves swallowing a glittering, sinful capital. For generations, these were considered mere fables, poetic explanations for the relentless power of the ocean. Yet today, we are beginning to understand that these stories are often rooted in a deep, collective memory of real events, oral histories passed down across hundreds of years that recall the actual drowning of ancestral homelands. They are the first clue, a whispered invitation to look more closely. Modern geology is now accepting that invitation on a global scale. The massive deltas of the world's great rivers, like the Mekong and the Mississippi, are not just landforms, they are immense archives. These rivers have delivered unimaginable volumes of sediment over millennia, gently and continuously burying the landscapes of the past. Geological surveys using sub-bottom profilers reveal layer upon layer of this accumulated history, and within those layers, the subtle, unnatural signatures of past human habitation are waiting to be read. The potential is staggering, suggesting that beneath the familiar contours of these deltas lie the remains of countless villages, trading posts, and early urban centers, their stories preserved in the very silt that covered them. The process of discovery is being shaped by a powerful, modern force. Climate change, with its intensified storms and accelerated coastal erosion, is a double-edged sword for this submerged heritage. On one hand, it is a dire threat as stronger waves and rising seas scour away vulnerable sites before they can be documented. On the other, it is an unexpected revealer. As shorelines erode and sediments shift, long-buried structures and artifacts are being exposed for the first time in centuries, offering fleeting, unplanned windows into the past. The next great age of discovery will be driven by our technological proxies. Autonomous underwater vehicles, or UVS, are set to become the primary explorers of these deep frontiers. These robotic craft can map vast, dark expanses of seabed with a patience and precision impossible for human divers, using sonar and laser scanners to create photorealistic three-dimensional models of entire sunken landscapes. As these technologies become more accessible and their sensors more sensitive, we will be able to systematically scan the world's continental shelves, the vast, shallow plains that were dry land during the last ice age. This is where the most profound discoveries likely await, the lost territories where early humans first migrated and settled. The maps in our history books are still provisional, missing the vast, water-covered chapters of the human story. The coming decade promises to fill in those blank spaces, revealing a planet far richer in its historical tapestry than we ever knew. This expanding knowledge does more than satisfy our curiosity about the past. It holds up a mirror to our own precarious relationship with the coast, reminding us that the landscapes we call home have been home to others before, and that the line between land and sea has always been, and will always be, a temporary one. That same geological drama is unfolding right now on a global scale. The slow subsidence of a river delta, the relentless creep of sea level rise, these are not just forces of the distant past. They are the very same processes that threaten modern megacities from Miami to Mumbai, Shanghai to New Orleans. The stories of Dunwich and Rungholt are more than historical curiosities. They are controlled experiments in coastal vulnerability played out over centuries, and their results are terrifyingly clear. They teach us that a community's greatest strength, its access to the sea, can become its ultimate weakness when the environmental balance shifts. The geological record provides the long view, revealing that our coastlines are not permanent fixtures but transient zones of conflict between land and water. What we build as eternal, the Earth sees as temporary. This historical perspective is a powerful planning tool. It forces us to ask not if the sea will claim more land, but when and how. It shows that the most devastating outcomes occur at the intersection of gradual change and a single, catastrophic event. A city can cope with slowly rising waters for decades, but when a major hurricane or a king tide arrives on top of that higher baseline, the results are catastrophic. The medieval response was often to rebuild in the same vulnerable location, a testament to human tenacity but also a failure to read the long-term environmental signs. We now have the knowledge to make different choices. Understanding how peat layers compress or how storm surges deposit their sand gives modern engineers the data to model future scenarios with greater accuracy. It informs the design of seawalls, the restoration of protective wetlands, and the difficult but necessary discussions about managed retreat from the most vulnerable areas. The past offers a library of strategies, both failed and successful, from the turpin mounds that raised villages to the dike systems that sometimes held and sometimes broke. This historical knowledge is not about preventing change, but about building resilience in the face of it. It guides us to work with the natural dynamics of the coast rather than against them. The quest to understand these lost worlds continues to evolve, driven by a new generation of explorers who no longer need to get their feet wet to map the ocean's deepest secrets. These robotic explorers are the silent surveyors of the deep. Autonomous underwater vehicles, or a UVS, glide through the water on pre-programmed missions, their sensor arrays painting the seabed with sound and light. They work tirelessly in the dark and the cold, far beyond the limits of human endurance, capturing millions of data points to construct photorealistic three-dimensional models of entire sunken landscapes. We are no longer just mapping points on a chart. We are building digital twins of lost cities, virtual worlds that researchers can walk through from their labs on dry land. Alongside them, remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, act as our hands in the deep, their high-definition cameras and manipulator arms allowing for delicate inspection and recovery under the direct control of a pilot on a surface ship. This partnership between autonomous mapping and directed observation is revolutionizing the scale and precision of our underwater exploration. But what if a site has no visible structures left to model? The very soil itself is beginning to give up its secrets through a revolutionary technique known as sediment DNA analysis. Imagine taking a core sample from a submerged paleosol and, through meticulous laboratory work, detecting the faintest genetic traces of the community that once lived there. We could identify the presence of specific livestock like cattle or goats, confirm the cultivation of ancient grains like emmer wheat or barley, and even detect the genetic signature of the people themselves, all from a handful of mud that appears to the naked eye to be completely barren. This moves discovery from the architectural to the intimate, revealing the fabric of daily life long after the last stone wall has crumbled. Our view from above is also gaining new dimensions. Hyperspectral imaging satellites are learning to see the invisible. By analyzing how light reflects off the earth and water in hundreds of subtle wavelengths beyond human vision, these advanced sensors can potentially detect the unique chemical fingerprints of limestone, fired brick, or mortar lying beneath a few meters of clear, shallow seawater. A faint, unnatural chemical smear on a satellite image could one day be the initial clue that leads a robotic sub to a forgotten harbor wall. The sheer volume of data generated by these tools is immense, which is where artificial intelligence enters the story. Machine learning algorithms are now being trained to perform the Herculean task of pattern recognition. They can scour terabytes of geophysical survey data or satellite imagery, learning to distinguish the straight line of a human-built canal from a natural crack in the bedrock, or the rectangular signature of a foundation from a random scatter of boulders. This digital assistant never gets tired, and it can process in hours what would take a human researcher years, flagging only the most promising anomalies for expert review. This convergence of technologies creates a powerful new discovery engine. An UV maps a vast area. Its data is filtered by an eye for potential features. A satellite then scans those locations with hyperspectral sensors, and finally, an ROV is sent down for a close-up visual confirmation. This integrated process promises to accelerate the pace of finding lost sites exponentially, moving us from occasional, serendipitous finds to systematic, global surveys of our submerged heritage. With such powerful tools at our disposal, the stories we uncover compel us to look forward as much as they do back, prompting a final reflection on what this rediscovered past means for our own future on this changing planet. Our journey into the deep has reached its end, but the story it tells is far from over. We have walked the ghostly streets of Dunwich, felt the sudden silence of Saeftinghe, and deciphered the final moments of Rungholt, not with shovels, but with the subtle language of the earth itself. The layers of peat, the sudden bands of storm sand, and the submerged floors of ancient homes have given these lost places a voice. They speak not of simple endings, but of a continuous, fragile dance between human ambition and the immense, shifting power of the planet. These cities were not erased in a single, malicious act. They flourished during times of climatic favor, their economies tied to the very waters that would one day claim them, and they faced their end through a slow convergence of sinking land, rising seas, and intensifying storms. This intricate tapestry of cause and effect reveals a profound truth about our own place in the world. The coastlines we build upon today are just as dynamic, just as temporary in the grand scale of geological time. The past urges us to look forward with wisdom, to see our own harbors and coastal megacities not as permanent fixtures, but as participants in that ancient, ongoing dialogue between land and sea. Let the silent testimony of these sunken worlds inspire a deeper curiosity about the hidden chapters of human history and a more thoughtful stewardship of the vibrant, vulnerable edges of our world. If these echoes from the deep have resonated with you, we would love to hear which lost city captures your imagination most in the comments below. For more journeys into the secrets buried just out of sight, subscribe and join us next time. The map of the past is still being drawn, and its next great discovery might be waiting just beneath the waves or perhaps beneath your very feet.